Have you ever stopped to think how many times we judge someone just by their appearance? How many incredible, painful, or even heroic stories pass before our eyes, and we simply don't notice? Because what you see now may surprise you. It was just another ordinary day in a small American diner. Tables full, smell of fresh coffee in the air, laughter in the background. A group of young people enter the restaurant, laughing loudly, as if the world revolves around them. Between jokes and exaggerations, they choose a table in the center, making a point of being noticed. In the corner of the room, however, a stark contrast. An elderly man, alone, calmly enjoying his meal. He wears a worn military jacket, the kind that carries more than fabric. It carries stories, scars, memories. But young people don't see that. For them, he is just another old man. And that's where it all starts. You know that kind of mocking laugh that doesn't care if it hurts someone? It was exactly like that. The jokes start low, but gain courage as they realize that you don't react. They comment on his clothes, imitate the way he chews, and call him toy soldier. They mock the past that they don't even know. One of them even asks loudly with contempt, "Hey, were you the one who saved the world?" Followed by laughter. And the veteran? It's still there. In silence. With an almost uncomfortable calm. But his steady gaze says more than 1,000 words. The waitress notices. The employees exchange glances. No one dares to interrupt. Anyone who already knows him understands. He doesn't need to explain himself. He's done this for too long. How many times in real life are we these young people, judging without knowing, laughing at stories we haven't heard, disrespecting legacies that were built with pain, courage, and sacrifice? Have you ever been through this? Have you ever seen someone belittled just because they seem fragile or out of time? At this point in history, you may already be asking yourself, who is this man? What does he carry behind that calm look? Why, despite being mocked, does he choose silence over response? Stay with me until the end, because what happens next isn't just unexpected, it's transformative. This is not just a story about a war veteran. It's about respect, about the way we treat others without knowing what they've been through. It's about the difference between appearing weak and having lived long enough to no longer need to prove anything. It's about courage, and the price it takes. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because behind that silence there was something deeper than any answer, something that the young mocker did not yet have the maturity to understand. As the laughter continued to echo throughout the hall, some people stopped eating. Others just looked away, embarrassed. And still, no one said anything. It was as if everyone was waiting for the veteran's next move, but he remained impassive, as if he were used to that kind of injustice. It's at this point that we find ourselves thinking, how many times does a mocking gesture, which to those who make it seem like just a joke, leaves invisible marks on someone who has already seen the worst in life? How many times do we fail to recognize the value of a story because it comes from someone that society insists on forgetting? And you, have you ever seen something like this happen? Have you ever felt this discomfort when seeing someone being disrespected in public? If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you most so far. Sometimes sharing how we feel helps other people notice things they haven't noticed before. It could be a memory, an opinion, or even an outburst. All of this matters a lot. I read each comment with care, because it is this exchange that keeps this channel alive. And if this story has captured you so far, if it made you reflect in some way, click like. This seems small, but it really helps this content reach more people who, like you, also care about respect, humanity, what is really worth it. And of course, if you feel that this is the type of content you want to continue following, real or fictional stories but always full of soul, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. Your participation here is what makes this space grow. Each new subscriber is a seed that we plant together to spread more empathy around. Because what's coming now goes far beyond a simple provocation in the diner. It is the revelation of a truth that changes everything. His silence was not fear. It wasn't weakness. It was choice. And that choice said more than any blunt answer could ever say. The veteran, still with the same disconcerting calm, finishes his last sip of coffee. Amidst the muffled noise of conversations and dishes being stacked, he stands up. And it is in this simple gesture that something changes. It wasn't dramatic, nor was it exaggerated, but it was felt. It was as if the ground had suddenly become firmer beneath his feet. The group of young people's laughter subsided, almost as if some instinct deep down warned them that this was not a good idea. The man walks slowly, with heavy but determined steps. The worn jacket seems even more symbolic now. And then it shines. Small, almost hidden in the pocket, an old medal shines discreetly in the warm light of the diner. A modest shine, but with a weight that no one there would know how to measure. The waitress, who was coming from the counter holding the coffee pot, changes direction. Goes straight to him. With a respectful smile, he bows his head slightly and says just one word. Major. That's when everything stops. It wasn't her tone of voice. It was the way she said it. With reverence. With an admiration that can only be felt by those who have seen things that few would have the courage to face. And, without asking anything, she adds, "Coffee is on the house, as always." That small scene, which could go unnoticed by anyone who was distracted, hits the young mocker like an icy wave. He, who used to laugh, now watches in silence. His friends try to maintain their posture, but the joke has lost its humor. Something there was revealed, not with words, but with a detail, a gesture, a hidden truth that was always there, in front of everyone, but no one wanted to see. And it's interesting how respect can arise not from a shouted lesson, but from an imposing presence. That man didn't need to justify himself or confront. He just existed with enough dignity for others to realize how wrong they were. It is at these times that we realize the power of a trajectory. The medal wasn't there as a prop. She was not an ornament of vanity. It was a reminder, for those who knew how to look, that before that silence, there had been noise, shooting, losses, impossible decisions, codes of honor that are not learned in school, but in the field. And not just any field, fields of war, of sacrifice, of humanity put to the test. As much as youth sometimes hides behind arrogance, there is something that always escapes the control of those who think they are invincible. Experience. And when she performs, it doesn't take much for the masks to fall. One gesture, one look, a simple major said with respect, and everything changes. The young man, still not understanding exactly what he is feeling, looks around and realizes that no one else is laughing. The expressions changed. The people in the restaurant began to see the man differently, or maybe they always had, but now they were allowed to show it. And then comes the question that no one dares to ask out loud. Who is this man anyway? What had he experienced to be treated like that? What kind of story does he carry behind that faded jacket? Because if there's one thing that's clear, it's that that old man isn't just any old man. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what is about to happen will show that respect is not demanded. It is earned, and when it is accompanied by the truth, it has an impact that transforms not only the view we have of others, but also the way we start to see ourselves. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The sound of the phone sliding across the table was barely noticeable. The old major took an old cell phone from the inside pocket of his jacket, one of those with keys you don't often see anymore, typed quickly and put it to his ear. There was no rush, no too many words, just a "bring it on." Short sentence, calm, but with a weight that no one in that restaurant could explain. It was as if he had just triggered something that had been waiting for a long time. After that, he sat down again, in silence, as if nothing had happened. The young man continued to laugh, but now with less certainty. The jokes no longer came with the same enthusiasm. It was as if an invisible doubt had begun to spread within him. That man really looked ordinary, but there was something in the air, something out of place. The waitress was no longer smiling. The looks exchanged between the employees carried tension. And outside, the sky began to change color, as if the environment itself was preparing the ground for what was to come. 10 minutes later, the sound of engines filled the street. These were no ordinary cars. They were powerful, synchronized, like part of a ritual. Black motorcycles, with discreet military emblems, parked one by one in front of the diner. Then, 2 vehicles positioned themselves to the side, without sirens. The silence of the vehicles contrasted with the intensity of the scene. And then, the doors opened. Men began, one by one. all with the same firm posture, trained eyes, safe steps. Each face seemed to bring with it a story that time could not erase. Some had visible scars. Others, just an expression that denounced years of combat, losses, and difficult decisions. But there was something in common in all of them. The way they looked at the old major. Not as a colleague. Not just as someone from the past. But as a leader. An older brother. A reference. The atmosphere, which had previously been marked by laughter and mockery, was now immersed in silent respect. Customers stopped eating. Cutlery was left on the plates. Cell phones, forgotten for a few minutes on the tables. No one dared interrupt that moment. It was like watching the unfolding of a hidden truth finally being revealed. And every second carried an emotional impact that didn't need to be explained. The young man, now pale, tried to hide his discomfort. He stirred his glass, straightened his shirt, looked around as if looking for an invisible exit, but there was nowhere to run. One of the men, the heaviest, with a tattoo on his forearm that resembled an infantry symbol, approached the veteran's table. He saluted. Then he extended his hand, with a firm gaze. "Major, good to see you again." And then, everything fell into place. It was as if that silent greeting had torn the veil of ignorance that enveloped the place. The mocking young man no longer laughed. He just watched. I felt. He understood, little by little, that this seemingly ordinary man had led men like those, that behind that faded jacket there was a past full of behind-the-scenes that he would never have been able to imagine, that behind that calm look were life and death decisions, and a story of courage that he would never be able to mock again. The boy's mentality began to change there, even if he still didn't understand how. The impact was not immediate, but it was ongoing, like a wave that first retreats, silently, and then advances with full force. The veteran didn't look at him. It didn't need to. The simple fact of being there, being recognized by men of honor, said it all. There was nothing left to prove. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this young man's true transformation hasn't even begun yet, and what is about to happen will change everything he believed he knew about honor, identity, and legacy. Right there. I'm on this journey too. The silence, which until then seemed uncomfortable, now became sacred. It was as if every breath in the room was calibrated to the rhythm of something bigger happening. The young man remained static, almost without blinking, observing the approaching men with the same discipline as a coordinated mission. No words had been spoken until then, but the atmosphere had already changed completely. There was no more laughter. Just the sound of heavy footsteps, the leather of boots touching the floor, and the tension that filled the air like a dense fog. It was then that one of the veterans, with a posture that imposed authority, approached the young man's table. He didn't say anything right away. He just held out his hand with a brown leather briefcase, worn with time. The young man, confused, received her without understanding, and it was when he opened it that reality finally exploded in front of him. Inside, there were more than documents. There was a timeline. A sequence of moments frozen in old photographs, battle records, medals, names of operations, and a handwritten letter, with yellowed paper, addressed to Major William R. Dempsey himself. The handwriting was firm, direct. It said, among other things, "The Major's silent courage saved my life, and the lives of 11 other soldiers that night in Kandahar. He never told anyone, but we never forgot." The young man read it once, twice, 3 times. The words began to penetrate the pride that until recently made him laugh at a man he didn't even know. The blood felt colder. The hands were shaking. The throat dries up. It was as if he was facing a revelation that put his entire mentality in check. Here he was, a boy who mocked what he didn't understand, now facing the hidden truth of someone who had lived through more pain, more honor, and more sacrifice than he could bear to imagine. Each photo told a story. Each document was a real souvenir, and they all pointed to a single fact, that man had served in silence, fought in silence, and now he was recognized in silence. The young man looked up and met the Major's eyes for the first time since it all began. There was no anger in that look, nor superiority, just firmness, and a kind of compassion that dismantled any emotional barriers. It wasn't a look of someone who wanted punishment. It was from someone who already understood over time that some truths need to be discovered the hard way, because only then can they bring about real transformation. You can see, on the boy's face, the exact moment he breaks. Not on the outside, but on the inside. The expression changes. The chin trembles. He tries to hold on, but the impact is greater than the pose. For the first time in his life, perhaps, he understands what it is like to be in front of a true hero. Not the ones in movies, where they scream, blow things up, and always win, but those who face hell and return with their souls still whole, even carrying invisible scars. The letter slips from his hand and falls onto the table. The veteran who handed over the folder carefully collects the paper and puts it away again. There is no need for more words. The message has already been passed. The young man tries to say something but gives up. This is not the time to speak. It's time to listen with your heart, to review your own attitudes, to decide who he wants to be from then on. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a type of regret that does not paralyze but drives, that generates a new look, a new posture, a conscious choice to follow a different path. And this is what is beginning to be born now, even if in silence. Comment. That makes sense to me. He didn't know what to say. The throat is stuck, the eyes are lost, the shame written on the face like a stain that cannot be disguised. The young man took a deep breath, gathered his courage and tried to speak, but the words simply wouldn't come out the way he wanted. The attempt at an apology escaped between clenched teeth, filled with nervousness and sincere regret. He stammered something like, "I'm sorry, but was interrupted not by a sudden gesture or a lecture, but by the veteran's firm gaze. The answer came dry, precise and profound. A single sentence without changing the tone of voice, but which hit the nail on the head. It's not about me. It's about who you choose to be." And it was as if the world around him had stopped for an instant. There was no more clanking of cutlery, no more whispering or footsteps in the background. Just that phrase echoing inside the young man's mind, tearing away his defenses one by one. Because it wasn't really about the veteran. It never was. Major Dempsey didn't need anyone's validation. I wasn't there looking for recognition or applause. That man had already made too many difficult choices, faced the worst of humanity, seen friends leave, and carried the responsibility for decisions that shape destinies. The respect he commanded was not a request. It was a consequence. And the answer he gave was more than a correction. It was a lesson. The boy's mind revolved around that phrase. It's about who you choose to be. And there, he began to understand. He started to look at himself in a different way. The mockery that previously seemed harmless now revealed a bitter layer. A direct reflection of one's own immaturity, of insecurity disguised as superiority, of the need to diminish others to feel greater. And that hurt. It hurt more than any scolding, than any public humiliation, because it was an internal, inevitable, real confrontation. At that moment, the young man was no longer at the table, at least not emotionally. He was immersed in memories, in scenes from other times when he mocked someone, in thoughtless attitudes, in laughter that now sounded empty. The shame, which initially was due to having been exposed, now became due to something greater, for having been small, for not having seen the humanity of those in front of him. This kind of regret has a strange taste. It is not repentance that asks for forgiveness just to alleviate guilt. It is one that is accompanied by a true desire for change, root review, of mentality transformation. He wanted to say something more. He wanted that man to know that he understood. That lesson would not be forgotten. But the major just turned around, adjusted the collar of his jacket, and sat down again in silence, as if he knew that the message had been delivered, and that what matters now is what will be done with it. It's curious how sometimes one sentence is capable of having more impact than 1,000 speeches, because it is not loaded with theory, but with experience, behind the scenes that no one sees, of choices that were made when no one was looking. And this truth, raw and revealing, makes the young man look around with new eyes. The friends who had previously laughed with him were now silent, some not facing his direction. There was no more room for jokes. What remained there was a space of silence, and learning, And it is precisely in this space that the opportunity to grow arises, to change, to decide, consciously, who you want to be when no one is applauding you, when everything just depends on your attitude towards life, people, the truth. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because true greatness is not in reacting with force, but in responding with wisdom. And sometimes, the greatest test of character is given in the moment when you could fight back, but choose to teach. Comment. I'm on this journey too. The days that followed were not the same for that young man. The noise of consciousness itself seemed louder than any external sound. The image of Major Dempsey with that serene look and the phrase that cut deep. "It's not about me. It's about what you choose to be," wouldn't leave his head. There was no way to continue as if nothing had happened. Something had been activated inside. An invisible but definitive turning point. And so, without fanfare, he appeared at the city's Veterans Hospital. No cameras, no publicity, no audience. I was there of my own free will, perhaps not yet knowing exactly what I was looking for, but certain that I needed to start somewhere. And the right place, at that moment, was exactly where he never thought of stepping. The environment was silent, but full of stories. Men and women with eyes marked by experiences that go beyond any history book. Ordinary people with names that the world has forgotten, but who carried in their bodies and memories the marks of a past that few would have the courage to face. He arrived timidly, almost afraid to cross the threshold, but it was received naturally. No one asked why he was there. They just offered a discreet smile and invited him to sit. And he sat down. And he listened. Long conversations, paused, interspersed with silences that said more than words. Stories of pain, of overcoming, of companionship, of decisions that cost more than can be calculated. With each new story, the young man felt a part of himself being rebuilt. It was as if every sentence said by those men and women sewed back something that he didn't even know was torn. A veteran has told how he survived an ambush attack in Iraq, and then spent years dealing with the guilt of returning while his friends stayed. Another recalled returning home, and the cold silence of a society that doesn't know what to do with those who return different. And there was also the one who spoke little, but who offered a handshake with such firmness and truth that it said everything. The young man's transformation did not come all at once. It grew in silence, taking shape through listening, through attentive observation, through the empathy that emerged as a natural consequence. It wasn't about feeling bad about making fun of the major. It was about truly understanding that the world is much bigger than what he knew. That there are entire lives happening parallel to ours, full of meaning, of invisible battles, of legacies that deserve to be respected. Days later, now more familiar with the hospital corridors, he began to help with small things. Fetch water. Bring a coffee. Read aloud to a veteran who had lost his vision. Simple things. But that gained enormous weight when done with intention. It wasn't a service. It was presence. It was repair. And then came the scene that said the most without needing to explain anything. He arrived at the hospital, as he had been doing, but this time wearing a different shirt. Nothing fancy. It was a basic piece, made of cotton, but with a discreet phrase on the chest. Beyond the war. A silent symbol of everything he had experienced, of everything he had learned, and of everything he, now, began to choose to be. The phrase was not just a tribute to the major, it was a personal commitment. A daily reminder that the most important war is not always the one that takes place on the battlefield. Sometimes it happens within, when we are challenged to change, to review, to grow. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because true honor is not only in the past of those who fought, but in the future of those who learn from this struggle and decide to continue this legacy with humility. Comment. That makes sense to me. Not every hero arrives on the scene with a bang. Some have no soundtrack, no emotional speeches, no spotlights pointed at them. Sometimes they just want to drink a hot coffee in peace. Sometimes they are there, right there, in front of us, in the same space, at the same time, carrying a story that no one sees, but that has shaped the world in which we live. And maybe the only thing they really expect is respect. The major left the hospital without fanfare, the same way he entered places. In silence, head high, firm steps. At the door, He gave a slight nod to the young man who was watching him from afar. A simple gesture, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning. It was like a silent seal, a silent approval, like someone recognizing that the other's journey is starting on the right path. The young man, now transformed, did not respond with words. He just nodded, in a mix of gratitude and reverence. He finally understood that he no longer needed big gestures to show what he felt. The true transformation had happened inside, where no one sees, but where it all begins. And it's curious how life teaches through the cracks. It's not always with screams, it's not always with shock. Sometimes it is with silence, with time, with listening, with presence. The most profound impact, most of the time, comes not from what is said, but from what is experienced. And what that boy experienced in the last few days was more than a learning experience. It was a reconstruction. The t-shirt he now wore, Beyond the War, was no longer just a souvenir of the diner episode. It was a symbol of the new mindset he was developing. A daily reminder that every choice he made from now on would need to reflect not just who he wanted to appear, but who he truly wanted to be. This was the most important decision, the one that no one sees, but that defines everything. He returned to the restaurant a few days later, not by chance, but because I felt I needed to end a cycle. He sat at the same table where it all started, ordered the same dish. The atmosphere was different, but perhaps he was the one who was different. The waitress recognized him. He gave a slight smile. I didn't say anything, only serve coffee. And there, in that place that was the scene of mockery, ignorance, confrontation, something else was now born. Awareness, respect, maturity. What started as a humiliation turned into a story of impact, and what seemed like just another bad joke turned into a journey of revelations and maturity. The veteran didn't show up that day, but his presence was still there. In the way the employees talked about him, in the way the young man observed the environment, in living memory of a lesson that would not be forgotten. Because this is the true legacy of those who fought for us. It is not what they carry in their chest, but what they leave in others. It's the silent mark that remains after they leave. It is the echo of attitudes that continue to teach even when they no longer say a word. And perhaps, the biggest lesson of this story lies precisely in this. In recognizing that each person has baggage that we don't see. That not every uniform is visible. That some scars are invisible to the eye but giant in the soul. And that, in the end, what matters most is not appearing strong, it's being human. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding the value of a legacy is not just remembering the past, but making a commitment to do something with it in the present. Comment. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, perhaps this story has spoken to some part of you that also values what really matters, respect, empathy, and the courage to change. And if so, leave the phrase in the comments, I'm with you until the end. So I know that you walked with me until the last line of this journey. And honestly, that means a lot. If this content touched you in any way, if it made you think differently or see something from a new angle, leave a like. It's not just a button. It's a sign that this conversation was worth it. And if you feel that stories like this have space in your life, that this type of reflection needs to continue, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories. We build bridges between the past, present, and what we can become.